Okay, so yesterday in our live stream fellowship on my channel, after praying together, a few of us were kind of sharing some words that we got really from just how we feel the Lord's been speaking to us, especially through time of prayer. And Sister in Christ Miriam mentioned about 7 day wedding with the Lord. And it's interesting because during that time of praying on yesterday's show, I was made to feel that we would be with the Lord for 7 days. And this was an amazing kind of confirmation. So, whilst I was praying yesterday on the show, I did a Google search, and we all know the story of obviously how Jacob was fleeing from Esau and went to stay with his uncle Laban. And that's where he wanted to marry Rachel. And so he said, obviously, to Laban, I will work for you for 7 years, because it is obviously deemed appropriate to pay for, your bride, to offer a dowry to the family of the bride as a blessing, um, rather than a purchase making, if you know what I mean, as a blessing to the family, for being able to have her as your wife. Um, so most people would sort of consider a 7 year period as a reasonable amount of time to be able to earn up that kind of money to pay for an acceptable dowry bridal price. Okay, so um, Jacob said to Laban, I tell you what, I'll work for you for 7 years, and then I'll have Rachel, as my wife. And so Laban agreed to that, and Jacob worked for 7 years. But Laban tricked Jacob, and instead of giving him Rachel, he gave him Leah. Leah is the older daughter between the two. And so, of course, Jacob didn't know until morning and found out that he'd been with Leah and not Rachel. And he was quite annoyed about that. So he said to Laban, I wanted Rachel and you gave me Leah. You tricked me, because we know that Jacob means deceiver. So pretty much Jacob was getting you know, what he'd done in his life anyway, because he had already tricked his own father by pretending to be Esau and gaining the firstborn birthright. So Laban then says to him, this is all in Genesis 29. He says, okay, well, you finish off the week with Leah, and which is like a time period for a man to be with his wife. And then after that time of being with Leah, I will give you Rachel, but you have to work another 7 years. So this is what's known as what people would call Jacob's trouble. But Jacob's trouble is more than just 7 years. Obviously, Jacob had to work two sets of seven. The first set seemed but a few days to him because he loved Rachel so much. So it didn't seem like much to him to do. But obviously, he had to work another 7 years. But he did get Rachel at the start of those 7 years. But he had to obviously be with Leah for another 7 days to continue that week, to fulfill that marriage with her, and complete it. So he had obviously two wives. And then he also had both their servants as well, because they were trying to get children and they ended up going through their servants first, their servant maids, and then they were able, therefore, to conceive their own. And it was like a competition between the two women. And we know that Rachel had Joseph first and then Benjamin. So this is really a summary of really what happened. But the concept is that we obviously know that in a way you could see that even though they were both obviously of the same family, you could see that maybe Leah represents the Gentiles and Rachel represents the Jews. So this is where we could see a time of fulfillment where the Lord is going to fulfill a week with the Gentiles, and so that then he works again on the Jews, and that he will get the remnant, because there's a remnant that he has chosen in order to preserve the promise of the ancestors. So you can read about that in Romans chapter 9 to 11. So really, it's a case of looking at this week. Now, I've got, as you know, a calendar. Let me quickly go to there now. Now, this calendar that I've got is based upon, obviously, the full moon as the new moon. Now, I had received like hearing, 21st to the 27th in a dream recently in the last few days. And when I looked at the calendar, the 21st to the 27th is actually the 15th to the 21st days of the 6 month. And, this calendar has taken into account, as many others have, taken into account of adding the 13th month into a Hebrew lunar calendar in order for it to be a lunar solar calendar so that it keeps up in cycle with the solar calendar. So a 13th month is added 7 times within a 19-year period. Okay, now that's in order for the lunar calendar to keep in sync with the solar calendar, because the solar calendar is 365 days a year, but the lunar calendar is only 354 days in a year. Okay, so if you really want to know the reason for that, why there's like 11 days short, it's because of the fact is that a solar calendar is the measure of the Earth's rotation around the sun, whereas the lunar calendar of 354 days is the measure of the moon's rotation around the Earth. So that's why there's a difference. It's not like you're ignoring 11 days. It's just the fact is that it's not taken into account. So that's why they add a 13th month to keep it going like that. Now, the Islamic calendar, they use the crescent moon as their calendar. They use the lunar calendar. But interestingly enough, they don't actually add a 13th month in this 19-year metonic cycle, as they call it. They just reset it every 33 years. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? Anyway, going back to this calendar, which uses the full moon as the new moon, we have obviously, therefore, if that week of 7 days goes from the 21st of September to the 27th of September, that could be the week of tabernacles if we're not taking into account a 13th month in this entire timeline of 3.5 years that we've already had since 2014, since the blood moons. Because if I show you obviously the timeline, you can see that the bottom line there between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. is a 12-month period. We know that Jesus was crucified at the 3rd hour, but he was still with Pontius Pilate around the 6th hour, which is around noon. So that's why we have two kind of parallels of time going on in second Passover. And so obviously 12 months between you've got September 2016 from 9 a.m. to September 2017 being when the ninth hour begins at 3 p.m. So this is obviously where we see that begin. So if that is a 12-month period, potentially starting from September to September, so there being one complete year, then we're beginning, therefore, you could say, the 7th month again from September. Therefore, from the 6th of September is the initiation point from the 7th month. So going back to the calendar, therefore, because therefore that timeline doesn't take into account an extra 13th month, this could mean that this week would be the Feast of Tabernacles, and therefore today is the 7th day of Tabernacles, and tomorrow, the 28th day of September, is the 8th day of Tabernacles. Now, what's interesting as well, obviously, I just quickly whiz back just to clarify, there is a month taken into account on the top line, which is the Gospel of John timeline, and that's why the Passover night doesn't finish until the 5th of October. So just to let you know that that is why this timeline for the Gospel of John Passover night is still going on for another month, because that is taking into account an extra month of the 13th month. So that's why when Mary goes to the tomb, it was sunrise in the Gospel of Mark, which is what it is here, but it's still dark in the Gospel of John, because she goes to the tomb at early morning while it's still dark on the first day of the week. So really the resurrection has to happen while it's still dark in the Gospel of John Passover night timeline. So approximately now we're in the 5 a.m. time period. 5 a.m. began on the 21st of September. So we're in the final hour of the night, and therefore the morning begins at 6 a.m. So this is why we've really got from now until the 5th of October for the night time. And therefore, Jesus comes like a thief in the night has to really truly happen within the night time now. So this means that something has to happen before we get to the morning on the 6th of October. Okay. So, and just to whiz back quickly, that is still within the ninth hour, because the ninth hour goes from 3 p.m. till 4 p.m. So at 6th of October, that's actually midway between the hour. That's 3:30 in the afternoon. And we know that we read in the Gospels that about the ninth hour, at the ninth hour, this is when Jesus gave up his spirit. There was a massive earthquake. The temple curtain was torn in two, and we even know that there were some of the dead that were raised in their tombs, and coming out on the third day, they appeared to many people in the city. And as I've already shown you, that this time period now that we're in the ninth hour, since 2014, is now the third year. It's like we've gone through 3 days and 3 nights. So we're now in the 17th day, okay? Because the 3 nights would be the 14th night being the first solar eclipse, 15th night, second solar eclipse, third solar eclipse being the 16th night. So now we're in the 17th day. This is when Mary would go to the tomb after 3 days and 3 nights. And we're now looking really at the fulfillment of that being on the first day of the week, which is the 8th day. The first day is also the 8th day of the week. It's like the beginning and the end, if you know what I mean. So this is really exciting time period for us to be in, is really this time period. Now, I know a lot of people would say, well, the Feast of Tabernacles on the new crescent moon calendar is, starts in October. And I'll show you that now. Let me go to there now. Yeah, so this is really what Jewish culture would go by, is this is the time frame that they would go from. So therefore it would be, during the daytime of the 5th of October until the 11th of October. Now, Torah calendar does have that a day later, so they would go on a day later. But I personally would say that, this is probably more accurate, okay? Give or take a day. If you want to do it, it's up to you. But basically, by the 5th of October, we've got to see something happen, really, to be honest. So what's interesting is that obviously, as on this calendar, as I've already shown you, that the 28th of September is the 8th day after the 7-day week of this potential time frame of this week of tabernacles that isn't really in the 7th month, but it could be if there isn't that 13th month added. Now, we know that when Jesus was transfigured on the mountain, even Peter wanted to make 3 tabernacles, one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, and he didn't really know why he was saying that, and yet, it sounded a bit strange, but it was like there was a tabernacle theme, but yet it wasn't tabernacles. And that's kind of strange. And yet, so that's why we know that there is a transfiguration time frame that happens really on the 8th day for the manifestation of that glory. So this is really interesting. What I've got here is that, let me go back to this picture actually, is that last night on TV, I don't watch a lot of TV, but this came on. I was just flicking through the catch-up box that I got, and it was actually a hospital program was on. This is a hospital drama that we've got called Holby City, and this guy here, he's a doctor, and he wanted to romance his wife, and so he set up this nice surprise thing inside this room of the hospital. So this is really like what a Sukkot would look like during the Feast of Tabernacles. And I saw this last night on TV. And so the Jews would colour their tabernacles with lights. And they would, would be a time of celebration during that week. And then on the 8th day, they would come out of their Sukkot. But I just saw this and I just thought, isn't this amazing? And, even though it's in a hospital room, you've got the lights reflecting onto the windows of the hospital, and it actually looks like stained glass windows of a church. And that really just resonated with me, that this could be an indication of the time frame that we're in, that we are in this 7-day time frame, and that actually, seeing this yesterday, that would have been the 6th day of Tabernacles on the calendar and the time frame that I'm looking at. Therefore, today would be the seventh day, and tomorrow would be the eighth day of Tabernacles. Now, if you look at the Hebrew calendar, okay, not just this one for this week, right? But let me show you um, what Hebcal says, okay, for the 28th of September. So the 28th of September, if you look at the 30th of September, okay, the 30th of September would be the 10th day of the 7th month for Yom Kippur. Therefore, the 28th day of September would be the 8th day. Okay, so that would be the 8th day of the 7th month. Right, so this is the 7th month. I don't think it says that there. But I know Torah's going on by another day later. I'm just trying to show you that really, this is really what the Jews have got as their kind of official time frame, that they start their Sukkot really from the 5th to the 11th, and then Shemini Atzeret is on the 12th. Shemini Atzeret actually means the 8th day of gathering. So, this is why it's very exciting, is that I personally believe it's got to happen before the 6th of October. And if you look at it, okay, Jesus goes to the Feast of Tabernacles, right? At the beginning, you can read about this in John chapter 7. He goes to the Feast of Tabernacles in secret because his brothers were mocking him just beforehand, and he was saying, like, blah, 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 why do you have to do this stuff in secret? Why can't you just be known in public? And they were mocking him because they didn't believe in him. So it says that Jesus went to the feast, but not publicly, but in secret. So he went to the beginning of the feast in secret. So, if the new crescent moon calendar is the one to go by, which personally I have to have favoritism towards the other one, but if we're looking at it from that perspective, then it means that things have to happen at the beginning of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is on the 5th. Okay, and then Jesus then makes himself known at the middle of the week. Okay, which is where we are on the timeline of this 7 year timeline. Really, on my timeline, is that we're actually at the 3.5 year marker. I'll just quickly go back there and help you make sense of that. Is that according to this timeline that I have here, we are actually at the 3.5 year point. We're actually at the midway point. Okay, so this is why it's exciting. From the 14th to the 17th is really the first 3 days of really the feast of, you could say, the feast of unleavened bread. From the evening of the 14th day is when the feast of unleavened bread begins. And so this is why we're 3.5 years into this timeline, being that that's a midway point between a 7 year period, so a 7-day week. We're actually in the midway point. So this is why we are really expecting Jesus to appear in the mid-time week, which is now, but also for there to be the rapture, the secret kind of coming where not everybody's going to see him. And, they were asking, have you seen him? Where is he? Do you think he will come to this feast or not? So this is really why we have this as a amazing, quite an exciting time frame to be looking at. I personally believe that the 28th day of September is the 8th day, is tomorrow, is like the major high watch day. It's the 8th day of the 7th month if you're looking at a new crescent moon calendar here, but it's also the 8th day of the week in accordance to the picture that I've got here on my calendar, which would be, sorry, that's zoomed in there, on this point here. Okay, so the 22nd day of the 6th month, even though this is taking into account 13th month, this could actually be the 7th month. So this is the 8th day there. I know a lot of people are looking at the 30th of September as being the day of atonement, but we know that Aaron made atonement on the 8th day to establish the first covenant. The only reason why it was changed to the 10th day of the 7th month was because that his sons offered unlawful fire. And therefore the Lord said to Aaron, you can't come in now every day whenever you want. You're going to have to come in once a year. And that's it, to the most holy place. But we know that Jesus ministers under a different priesthood. Okay, so he fulfills the Levitical law, and in every way, in order to therefore fulfill the law, be obedient to the Levitical law, and then establish a new and everlasting covenant under a different priesthood, a priesthood that remains forever under the order of Melchizedek. Therefore, it would therefore make sense if Aaron makes atonement after a 7-day purification process, and you can read about that in Leviticus 8, and makes atonement on the 8th day, which is Leviticus 9, then it would make sense that Jesus would also therefore make atonement on the 8th day to establish the new and everlasting covenant. The 8th day is the day that no one knows the day or the hour to. It's the day outside of time and space. It's the day of the Spirit, which is why only the Father knows this day, because God is Spirit. Therefore, we know that there was a day where Jesus was born, and that's a day that came to pass, that the Word became flesh. And so this is why it says that neither the Son nor the angels know, because they were kind of, even though it says begotten, not made, it was like Jesus is like, he became flesh, and through Mary. So this is why it says in the Word, today I have become your Father and you have become my Son. And so this is why we know that Jesus is the Word made flesh. And so, and then we have obviously the angels who are created. So the Father is Spirit. And that's why the 8th day is the day of the Spirit. And this is why we're going to see really the manifestation of the Spirit of God, the very essence of God's presence, which is his holy consuming fire of his Spirit. This is why tongues of fire came down on the day of Pentecost with the Jews, which happened at the 3rd hour, which is 9 a.m. But we know when we read the book of Acts that the Holy Spirit was poured upon the Gentiles in the 9th hour, which means that this is why we're going to see a second Pentecost manifest from a second Passover to the Gentiles, in order that the fullness of the Gentiles might come in, so that the remnant of Israel may be saved. Amen. Well, this is quite a long video, but I just really wanted to encourage you that really we're living in such an amazing time period, where I truly believe that we're living in such a high watch time. And, you know, I have really a high watch time up until the 5th of October. And, you know, I know that there's feasts that go on in the 7th day, even on my calendar, that I could take us up to the 28th of October even. But for me, the timeline really finishes on the 5th of October. And with seeing, that's because obviously it's the end of the Passover night for the Gospel of John. And by seeing this yesterday, I really believe that that was a confirmation sign of the fact that we are already in the Feast of Tabernacles, prophetically speaking, on this timeline, and that tomorrow could indeed be the 8th day. The 8th day on this timeline, in terms of this calendar being without a 13th month, and also it being the 8th day of the 7th month on the new crescent moon calendar. Well, God bless you and have a great day.